Hello everybody. With the 0.9 release and influx of new players, I thought I'd make a new video for the Lich. It has been a year since my last video, but to be honest, there really isn't too many changes. But I thought I'd make a new build guide because they did make some changes to certain skills like Rip Blood and Transplant, which I'll go over in the video, and obviously the CDR implementation on gearing, certain things I want to build, and hopefully with enough RNG I can get get the build juiced and show it off to you guys a little later time. And for newer players who's interested in trying out the build, I do highly recommend it. It's a very fun class. It's fluid, it's very mobile, it does a lot of damage, it doesn't take too much to put together, it comes online fairly quickly around level 60-ish, and then as far as the unique requirements go, technically there's really no unique requirement to the build. It's just that having the Marina's Lost Soul wand and the Grimoire will highly improve the damage and survivability of the build. But we'll get into that a little later. With that being said, let's get into it. Alright, so for passives, it's pretty much the same as before. Start out with 8 points into necrotic resistance, and then you can do 4 points into increased damage, and then finish it off with 8 points of vitality. The Lich tree, you want to max out 8 points in the Dance of Death, 4 points into health and spell damage. Leech has health, increased necrotic damage because this build is focused around, circled around necrotic. The vitality, these little skellies, I don't get until later. And then get the crit chance, cast speed, penetration. For the flat spell necrotic damage, we skip this node first. We don't really need this because of the flat global spell damage you get from Rip Blood, so these points are not as worth. Then I go for the damage mitigation nodes. You just do 5 points here, and then once you get to, you're basically rushing Soul Maul first, and then you go backwards and fill in the rest. So 5 points into cast speed, move speed, damage leech, and then go to Soul Maul 5 points, and that's where your sustain comes from mainly. Before you get Soul Maul, the sustain for Reperform is not as good because you're not leeching as much. And then after you get Soul Maul, then you go backwards to fill in the rest, like the increased spell damage for damage mitigation, the crit multi, and then the flat spell, the flat necrotic spell damage. I have 4 points in Necromancer because of the on potion use, it grants 10% increased cast speed as well, which is nice because it complements this build, because you want to cast as fast as possible Rip Blood to gain as much global spell damage from the Rip Blood buff. And that pretty much sums it up for passives. Alright, for Rip Blood, 0.9, main change, this node right here, Arcane Absorption. Before it was a percentage increase, spell damage increase, but now it's a global spell damage, flat global spell damage per hit in the buff duration is 6 seconds. So as many Rip Bloods as you can squeeze in within the 6-second buff window is you're increasing your global flat spell damage, which is pretty nuts because pretty much buff is this build. Everything else is pretty much the same. You get double slatters, you get we change it to necrotic because this build is necrotic build. I mean, obviously there's a physical, you can do physical version too, but we're just going to do focus on necrotic for this build. I want the cast speed, and then I want the mana gain back because with cast speed, like with the splatters, the mana cost is kind of heavy if you're actually spamming Rip Blood, so you're gonna need to negate that with the mana granted from Rip Blood. Alright, Transplant. 0.9 brought quite a few changes to Transplant. First of all, now it's we benefit from getting haste and frenzy on transplant, which is pretty nuts considering that you can, with cooldown reduction and transplant cooldown reduction idols, along with cooldown reduction on your equipment and the cooldown recovery speed on this node here. Currently my cooldown is 2.6. I can probably bring it down a little lower. I don't have all the cooldown reduction gear yet, but it's probably gonna go down to maybe like at most 2.2 or so if you're min-maxing this. Another change is they reduced the amount of detonations on transplant, but they increased the damage, more damage multipliers on transplant. So I think the net is about the same, roughly, in terms of damage, but it's just less. I think they did this because they wanted to reduce the lag or the FPS drops that comes with like so many splatters or so many detonations from previous versions of the transplant. Another change is that now bonecurse is cast on transplant, so I don't have bonecurse on my bar because I'm not manually casting bonecurse anymore because it's recast on transplant. It's a nice quality life change. We're changing this to necrotic because we're doing the necrotic version of this build. They also made changes to these two nodes as well. This node is kind of whatever, but they did make they added a more damage to detonation node here. So you can, if you get more transplant points, you can spec into 2 more points in here. This rip blood cast is still the same. Now the access to bone armor, they made it so that we have to go through another 2 points here to get to bone armor. So it's kind of like you have to have a plus 2, +3, or even +4 transplant on your gear somewhere in order to access bone armor, and then you probably have to take away points from the detonation damage in order to get bone armor from transplant. So it's kind of like yeah, this is a nerf, right? But everything else, I think the quality of life change is nice. Alright, bonecurse. I'm gonna preface this by saying that bonecurse is right now is probably overtuned, just like a lot of other things in this game. Currently is overtuned or broken. I'm gonna put this bonecurse in that category. But in the meantime, while you know this lasts, just go ahead and enjoy it, have fun. So start off with that, okay? All right. The setup is, since we're going necrotic, we're going to change this to necrotic damage. You don't have to do that off the bat. You can work. The priority is to get cursed limbs because you want to have, or you want to be able to take advantage of the whole transplant casting bonecurse. So when you transplant, you cast bonecurse, but it's not going to do any good unless you have cursed limbs, because, well, after you cast transplant, that's when you like do your rip bloods and your splatters and all that. As long as you have cursed limbs, the bonecurse will apply to all the mobs that you hit, right, for 4 seconds after you do the transplant. That's the most important node for this build. Not this build overall, but like for bonecurse, obviously. And then this set up with the illusion of pain. It gives more like 150% multiplier. The reason I don't have it in the build planner is because I'm pretty sure that this interaction is probably gonna get nerfed. So I took these 2 points out and put it somewhere else. Okay. Oppressive gaze. For those who have questions on why this, because oppressive gaze does say a single target, right? But because you have cursed limbs and your rip bloods, your transplants, and the splatters that cast from the transplant, from the rip blood, it's AoE, right? So everything it hits will apply bone curse on those mobs because of cursed limbs. Okay, so even if it's single target here, it doesn't matter as long as you're hitting the mobs with with transplant, rip blood, or any other skill that you cast after transplant. It's gonna apply the bone curse. Okay. All right. Also, it has a kill threshold here too, which is nice. All right, that's it for bone curse. All right, Death Seal. So the fundamental skill for all Lich builds, it is like the Flame Ward for Sorks, Death Seal is for Lich. TLDR, it gives you more increased damage and also damage mitigation based off of your missing health. And that's why all Death Seal builds have Deadlock node. For this particular build, we're doing Hungering Souls release along with Death Wave. If you can get a tier 7 Death Seal on the helm, it'll give you 4 additional points, and you can use that to max out Doom Call for more damage on Death Wave, or you can go for the frequency on the Death Wave. I think frequency might be a little better, might feel a little better, but you can play around with it. Okay. The reason why we're doing this is because of the Rip Blood buff. Every time you're casting Rip Blood while your Death Seal is active, you're just buffing both the Death Wave damage and Hungering Souls proc damage, right? So all you're doing is Transplant, cast Death Seal, and spam Rip Blood. Right? It's a crap ton of damage. And now you don't even have to cast bonecurse, right? So now you just basically spamming Transplant and Rip Blood, and that's all you need to do. And if you feel like that's not enough damage, you can manually cast Hungering Souls as well, because the frequency did get nerfed from the Death Seal procs. It used to be like a machine gun, but now it's more like, you know, 1 second, or it feels a lot slower, right? So you can supplement that by manually casting Hungering Souls. Okay, and that's it for Death Seal. Hungering Souls. We're doing the single big skull for this build. The setup is pretty straightforward. You make it into one big skull. 4 more points for 100% more hit damage. You got the crit base crit chance and crit multi. The main thing for this setup is the 3 minions. So you have to have exactly 3 minions to benefit this 150% multiplier. And that's why you have Harvested Legions on your passive tree. Basically, when you're mapping and you're just killing mobs, it just summons. You pretty much have the 3 vanguards up all the time. So, but for bossing, like if you find Lagon or whatever, you're gonna start off the Lagon fight with 3 3 vanguards. But what you can do is they're gonna get killed, right? Like pretty much once he does his lasers, they're not gonna survive. So what you can do is after you do your initial burst of damage, the vanguards get killed off, and you can just take off Hungering Souls and replace it with summon skeletons instead, right? So you summon the skeletons back, you get 3 skeletons, and then you Death Seal and Hungering Souls is benefiting again from the 150% multiplier. You can also put 1 more point in bonecurse to increase the chance of you summoning a skeleton vanguard. So instead of 10% from the passive tree, you get an additional 10% from bonecurse. You can just take 1 point off of probably cursed limbs, or if you have, I mean, preferably you're gonna have at least a tier 5 bonecurse on your relic as a prefix, so that you get additional 2 points, which you can put in there, put for the skeleton vanguards, or you could put somewhere else. Okay. I also wanted to briefly go over Soul Feast as an alternative to Hungering Souls. So you spec into Soul Feast for the damage mitigation, not so much for the damage does at all. So with speccing into Toxic Cravings, what this does is it consumes the poison stacks from the target and converts it to armor and poison resistance per stack of poison on the mob, right? And you change it to a cone and increase the area so that it doesn't require the mobs to have cursed in order to be affected by Soul Feast. Okay, But to demonstrate, this is a bad area to demonstrate because it's not level 100, but you know, it's the same idea, right? So when you're hitting the mob, right, you get stacks of poison, and then once you hit Soul Feast, you see the armor just goes up, shoots up to, you know, 4,000 or whatever it is, right? 3,000, 4,000. Obviously, since we're not at a 100 level zone, it's, the percentage is not accurate, but you get the idea, right? So without actually changing any of the gear that you currently have equipped, you'll get the armor mitigation and also the poison resistance, well, 570%, for 6 seconds, right? So this is an alternative that you can use if you're playing hardcore. I'd probably recommend this over doing Hungering Souls, but if you're playing softcore and you don't really care, then you know, just Hungering Souls, pew pew, more damage, right? Okay, this is just the alternative. Obviously, if you do run this, then you're gonna change the Death Seal and you're gonna take out the Hungering Souls because obviously it's not useful. And then you just put it into Doom Call and frequency of death waves. Okay. You're probably wondering why I don't have Reperform spec'd in this build. Well, the main benefit from Reperform is the second life, right? You have access to that as long as you have Reperform on your skill bar, which I do. Okay. Speccing to Reperform obviously gives you a secondary mobility skill, which is the Reap. As long as you spec into it, it doesn't share cooldown with Transplant, and that's probably one of the biggest trade-off, I would say. Obviously, you also lose cast speed, 30% cast speed, which is nice with the new Rip Blood change. But I mean, you know, I wanted to try this with an Inspect Reaper form. So the benefit of that is being able to also adding Hungry Souls onto my skill bar, not the skill, onto the spec, so that you can proc it from Death Seal. Obviously, if you don't want to do this, you can spec into Reperform, and pretty much it'll be my original build with the Rip Blood, Crit Lich, right? But with this Inspect Reperform, as long as you have an bar again, you can have access to the Reperform, but you have the flexibility of adding Hungering Souls to the Death Seal, or you can swap out Hungering Souls for Soul Feast for more survivability. I just want to test this out for 0.9 and play around with it because, well, now there's some quality life changes, and with the Transplant, especially with the bonecurse casting on Transplant, and yeah, we'll see how it is for the next upcoming weeks and months before the ladder gets released, and see what kind of tweaks they, hotfixes they put in place, and then we'll tweak the build accordingly. Okay. I wanted to touch briefly on the gearing for my goals this particular patch. So I didn't have too much time to play this past 4 days, and I didn't have much, too good of RNG. As some of the other fellow LE gamers. Anyways, I don't have my grimoire. I'm missing a lot of things. But anyways, my goal for this particular patch is with the introduction of cooldown reduction implicits on the rings, the opal ring and the helm, and also the suffix cooldown reduction on the belt and the boots. I'm gonna try to max out, if I'm lucky enough, I can get tier 7 cooldown reduction on either or both pieces. I will try to build around that, and then obviously it competes for the hybrid health and percentage health on the belt. Hopefully, if you get lucky, maybe you could steal a percentage health or something on tier 2 and then get a tier 7 cooldown reduction, or something that some godly loot drop that you might get. But that's one of the goals I have for this particular patch, and to try to get Death Seal down to sub 3 seconds. I think if you can get max CDR, you can get it down to 2.6 or something, or 2.7 maybe. I'm not too sure what the math is, but it's around around that time, which just makes it so much better. And the other thing I wanted to try was to substitute health on rings on suffix. to tier 6 or probably preferably tier 7 dodge, flat dodge, and also dodge rating, a tier 7 dodge rating on the neck, to complement a Queen's Chaps, jungle Queen's Chaps, which gives dodge and potion use, and it's a multiplier now. So they made some changes to that belt, but I mean, like, it's a very rare belt, and if I can get lucky with it and get 2 LP plus, then I'll try to slam it with CDR and hybrid health. I mean, that's just wishful thinking for now, but hopefully that's something that I would like to get and test out. So anyways, that's about it for gearing. You can always check out the build planner for what I would like ideally for gear for now, and I'll probably put down another build planner for like a wish list of gear I can get or work towards. And that's it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I also stream on Twitch, so you can hop in and ask me questions there. Okay. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and take care and see you next time. Ciao.